The coffee was still steaming when Staff Sergeant Dalton Kruger's open palm connected with Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez's temple. The impact echoed across the base cafeteria like a rifle crack, sending her stumbling sideways into a metal chair that scraped against concrete with a harsh shriek. "Probably asked for it," someone muttered from a corner table. Kruger stood over her, his chest heaving with righteous anger, completely unaware that security cameras had captured every frame and that his victim wore no visible rank insignia on her civilian workout clothes. "You think you can waltz in here and tell me how to run my equipment checks?" His voice carried across the suddenly quiet space where 37 service members had stopped eating to watch. Elena touched her temple where blood began to seep, her fingers coming away crimson. The sight should have sobered him, but Kruger's adrenaline had him past the point of rational thinking. Before we continue with what happened next, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar moments where assumptions led to serious consequences in your community. "She's making it look worse than it is," Kruger announced to the room, his voice defensive but still loud enough for everyone to hear. "Probably wants attention. Some of these civilian contractors think they run the place just because they have a fancy consultant badge." Elena remained on one knee beside the overturned chair, her breathing controlled despite the throbbing in her skull. She said nothing, but her dark eyes tracked every face in the room with the methodical precision of someone cataloging witnesses. The silence stretched uncomfortably as she slowly stood, her movements deliberate and careful. Two corporals near the serving line exchanged glances. One leaned toward his companion and whispered, "Think we should report this?" The other shrugged, clearly uncomfortable but uncertain about protocol, when the victim appeared to be a civilian contractor and the perpetrator was a respected staff sergeant with 12 years of exemplary service. Kruger misread their hesitation as validation. "See, nobody thinks this is a big deal except you." He gestured broadly at the room, full of silent observers. "You probably provoked this whole thing just to create drama. Maybe next time you'll think twice before questioning how real military personnel handle their responsibilities." The base intercom crackled to life with routine announcements about evening chow schedules, completely oblivious to the tension in the cafeteria. Elena finally spoke, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the hushed space. "What's your full name and unit designation?" Kruger laughed, a harsh sound that seemed to bounce off the walls. "You're kidding, right? You're asking me for my information? Lady, you just learned what happens when civilians try to throw their weight around on a military installation. Consider it a free education." Several junior enlisted personnel shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The woman's question had carried an undertone of authority that didn't match her casual appearance. But Kruger appeared completely oblivious to the subtle shift in atmosphere that others were beginning to sense. Elena reached into her jacket pocket with movements so controlled they seemed almost ceremonial. What she withdrew was a military identification card, but she held it low enough that only those closest could see the distinctive markings that indicated clearance levels far above anything a civilian contractor would possess. Staff Sergeant Dalton Michael Kruger. She repeated his full name with perfect pronunciation, clearly having memorized it from his name tape. 3rd Logistics Battalion, Motor Transport Unit 7. Her voice remained steady despite the blood, now trickling down her jawline. "Is that correct?" The precision of her information caused several observers to lean forward, their expressions changing from uncomfortable amusement to growing concern. Someone in the back of the room quietly set down their utensils, suddenly losing their appetite as the situation took on dimensions they hadn't anticipated. Kruger's confidence wavered slightly, but his anger still burned too hot for wisdom to prevail. "Yeah, that's right. And who exactly are you supposed to be? Some kind of investigator?" He gestured dismissively at her civilian clothes. "Because last I checked, contractors don't get to demand information from active duty personnel." The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Elena's response would change everything, but for this moment, 37 witnesses sat frozen in the uncomfortable space between what they had seen and what they were beginning to suspect they didn't understand. Elena held the identification card, where only the nearest tables could glimpse its surface, but even that partial view caused Corporal Martinez to choke on his coffee. The distinctive blue stripe running along the card's edge was something he'd only seen twice in 4 years of service, both times when base commanders had visited his unit. "You don't need to see my credentials to understand what just happened here," Elena said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made seasoned sergeants straighten their postures without thinking. "But you do need to understand that this incident is now part of an official record." Kruger scoffed, though his bravado sounded less convincing than it had moments earlier. "Official record? Lady, the only thing getting recorded here is your attempt to intimidate military personnel with whatever fake credentials you're flashing around." He turned to address the room, seeking validation from faces that were no longer meeting his eyes. Behind the serving counter, kitchen supervisor Patricia Holloway had stopped pretending to clean dishes and was openly staring at the exchange. She'd worked on military bases for 15 years and had developed an instinct for recognizing when situations were about to explode beyond anyone's control. Her hand moved toward the red emergency phone mounted beside the industrial refrigerator. Elena noticed the movement and gave Holloway an almost imperceptible nod. "Make the call," she said quietly, but her words carried clearly across the silent cafeteria. "Protocol 7 Alpha. Tell them Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez requires immediate security response to the main dining facility." The sound of 37 people simultaneously holding their breath created an eerie vacuum in the large space. Kruger's face went through several color changes as the words Lieutenant Colonel registered in his brain, but his mouth continued moving before his mind could catch up. "That's impossible," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "You're wearing civilian clothes. You're a woman. You look like you're barely 30 years old." He gestured wildly at her casual appearance. Lieutenant colonels don't just wander around bases in workout gear without any visible rank or identification. Elena's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes shifted from professional assessment to active calculation. The observation about her age and gender had crossed a line that transformed this from a simple assault into something far more serious. Every witness in the room sensed the temperature drop, though most couldn't articulate why. Holloway's voice echoed from behind the counter as she spoke into the red phone. "Protocol 7 Alpha activation. Main dining facility. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez requesting immediate security response." She paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "Yes," I said, Lieutenant Colonel. "No, this is not a drill." The kitchen supervisor's confirmation hit the room like a physical force. 3 junior enlisted personnel simultaneously pushed back from their table, their chairs scraping against concrete as military protocol instincts overrode their confusion. They'd been laughing at what they thought was a civilian getting put in her place, but the realization of what they'd actually witnessed was beginning to dawn. Kruger's face had gone pale, but his anger still burned hot enough to override his survival instincts. "This is ridiculous. Even if you're who you claim to be, which I seriously doubt, you were interfering with official military operations. I was conducting legitimate equipment inspections when you started questioning my procedures and undermining my authority in front of my subordinates." The cafeteria's main entrance doors suddenly swung open with enough force to bang against the interior walls. Master Sergeant Roy Blackwood strode through, his military police armband clearly visible and his hand resting on his radio. His eyes swept the room with professional efficiency before locking onto Elena's bloodied face. "Ma'am," Blackwood's voice carried the kind of respect reserved for senior officers. "Are you injured? Do you require medical attention?" His presence transformed the atmosphere instantly, lending official weight to what some had hoped might still be resolved as a misunderstanding. Elena touched her temple again, her fingers coming away with fresh blood. "I'll be fine, Master Sergeant. However, this incident requires full documentation and immediate chain of command notification." She gestured toward Kruger, who was now standing frozen beside the overturned chair. Staff Sergeant Kruger struck a superior officer. Multiple witnesses observed the assault. Blackwood's expression hardened as he processed the information. His gaze shifted to Kruger, then swept across the room full of silent observers. Nobody had moved from their positions, creating a tableau that would be permanently burned into their memories. The base intercom crackled again, but this time the routine announcements had been replaced by something far more ominous. All personnel maintain current positions until further notice. Security teams are responding to an active incident. This is not a drill. Kruger finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of what was unfolding around him. His mouth opened and closed several times before any words emerged. "I didn't know," he whispered, though his voice carried clearly in the absolute silence. "How was I supposed to know? She wasn't wearing any rank. She looked like a civilian contractor." Elena's response was delivered with the precision of someone who had spent years in command positions. Ignorance of a superior officer's identity does not excuse physical assault, Staff Sergeant. Your assumption that civilian clothing indicated civilian status reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of military protocol and base security procedures. The sound of additional boots in the corridor outside grew louder, suggesting that Master Sergeant Blackwood was just the beginning of what was about to become a much larger response. The 37 witnesses sat motionless, realizing they were no longer observers, but participants in an incident that would define their understanding of military hierarchy and consequence. The sound of heavy boots multiplied in the corridors surrounding the cafeteria, creating an ominous percussion that seemed to echo from every direction at once. Master Sergeant Blackwood pressed his radio to his ear, his expression growing more serious with each transmission he received. "Copy that command." "Yes, sir. Protocol 7 Alpha is confirmed active." He glanced at Elena, then at the growing blood stain on her temple. "Medical personnel are en route along with the duty officer and base security chief. Estimated arrival time is 3 minutes." Kruger had begun to sway slightly on his feet, the full weight of a situation finally penetrating his consciousness. His earlier bravado had evaporated completely, replaced by the kind of pale terror that came with realizing you'd just destroyed your own career with a single moment of poor judgment. Corporal Martinez couldn't remain silent any longer. His voice cracked as he addressed Master Sergeant Blackwood. "Sergeant, we saw the whole thing. Staff Sergeant Kruger hit her without warning. She never raised her voice or made any threatening moves. She was just asking about equipment procedures." Several other witnesses nodded in agreement, their military training overriding their reluctance to get involved. The assault had been unprovoked and public, making denial impossible. Kitchen Supervisor Holloway emerged from behind the counter, still holding the red phone. "Master Sergeant," she said, her voice tight with nervous energy, "Command wants to know if we need to secure the dining facility as a crime scene. They're asking about evidence preservation and witness statements." Blackwood's radio crackled again before he could respond. "All units, this is Base Commander Colonel Harrison. I am personally responding to the dining facility incident. All personnel currently in the area are to remain in position for official statements. No one enters or leaves until further notice." The announcement hit the room like a physical blow. Base commanders didn't personally respond to routine incidents, and Colonel Harrison's direct involvement meant this situation had escalated far beyond anything the witnesses had imagined possible. Several junior enlisted personnel looked genuinely sick as they realized they were about to give official statements to the highest-ranking officer on the installation. Elena remained standing beside the overturned chair, her posture straight despite the blood now dripping from her jaw onto her civilian workout shirt. She checked her watch with the kind of casual precision that suggested she was tracking response times against established protocols. "Master Sergeant Blackwood," she said quietly, "please ensure that Staff Sergeant Kruger understands his rights under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He's about to be formally charged with assault on a superior officer, and he'll need legal representation." The words hit Kruger like artillery rounds. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to grab the edge of a nearby table to steady himself. Assault on a superior officer was a career-ending charge under the best circumstances, but assaulting a lieutenant colonel could result in court-martial and potential imprisonment. "I didn't know," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, I swear I didn't know who you were. If I had seen any rank insignia, if you had been in uniform, this never would have happened." His desperation was palpable, but Elena's expression remained professionally neutral. The main entrance doors burst open again, this time admitting a team of medics carrying emergency equipment along with Captain Rebecca Torres, the base duty officer. Captain Torres took one look at the scene and immediately began establishing a command presence. "Master Sergeant Blackwood, report," she ordered, her voice carrying across the silent cafeteria. "What is the current status of the incident and all involved personnel?" "Ma'am," Blackwood responded crisply. "At approximately 1540 hours, Staff Sergeant Kruger physically struck Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez in full view of 37 witnesses. The assault was unprovoked and has been confirmed by multiple observers. Medical attention has been requested for the victim's head injury." Captain Torres's expression darkened as she processed the information. She approached Elena with the kind of careful respect reserved for senior officers. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Torres, duty officer. Are you experiencing any dizziness, nausea, or vision problems? The medics need to examine your injury before we proceed with formal statements." Elena allowed the medics to approach, but continued speaking while they began their assessment. "Captain, this incident requires immediate notification of Division Command and the Inspector General's office. Staff Sergeant Kruger's assault was witnessed by multiple personnel, and his statements afterward demonstrated clear gender bias and assumptions about civilian versus military authority." The lead medic, Senior Airman Walsh, carefully cleaned the blood from Elena's temple while examining the swelling. "Ma'am, you're going to need stitches, and I recommend a CT scan to rule out concussion. This was a significant impact to a vulnerable area of the skull." As the medic worked, more personnel continued arriving. The sound of vehicles parking outside suggested that the response was growing beyond the capabilities of base security. Radio chatter filled the air as various units coordinated their arrival and established security perimeters. Kruger watched the expanding response with growing horror. Each new arrival represented another level of command attention, another layer of scrutiny that would examine his actions. His assault on what he'd assumed was a troublesome civilian contractor had triggered a response typically reserved for major security incidents. The cafeteria had transformed from a routine dining facility into the center of what was clearly becoming a base-wide event. 37 witnesses sat frozen in their chairs, realizing they were about to become part of an incident that would be studied, analyzed, and remembered long after their own military careers ended. Captain Torres keyed her radio, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "Command, this is Torres. Confirming assault on Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez by Staff Sergeant Kruger. Multiple witnesses secured. Request immediate legal officer response and preparation for formal charges under Articles 86 and 89 of the UCMJ." The radio response was immediate and carried a tone of urgency that made everyone in the room understand they were witnessing something unprecedented. "Copy, Captain Torres. Colonel Harrison is en route with Division Legal and the base chaplain. Estimated arrival in 90 seconds. The rumble of Colonel Harrison's staff vehicle could be heard approaching long before it appeared in the parking lot, its engine note distinctly different from the standard base transportation. Through the cafeteria windows, witnesses could see additional vehicles forming a convoy that suggested this was no longer just a base-level incident. Senior Airman Walsh finished applying a pressure bandage to Elena's temple, his movements precise despite the growing tension in the room. "Ma'am, the bleeding has stopped, but you really need proper medical evaluation. This type of head trauma can have delayed complications that aren't immediately apparent." Elena nodded her acknowledgement, but kept her attention focused on the entrance doors. Colonel Harrison's arrival would begin the formal process that would determine not just Kruger's fate, but potentially impact base policies and procedures for months to come. The main doors opened with military precision, and Colonel James Harrison entered flanked by Major Patricia Reeves from the base legal office and Chaplain Captain Michael O'Brien. Harrison's presence immediately transformed the atmosphere, his 3 decades of command experience evident in how he surveyed the scene with methodical efficiency. Captain Torres snapped to attention, her voice carrying clearly across the silent cafeteria. "Sir, incident report as follows. At 1540 hours, Staff Sergeant Dalton Kruger physically assaulted Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez. The assault occurred in full view of 37 witnesses and resulted in visible injury, requiring medical attention." Colonel Harrison's gaze moved from Elena's bandaged temple to Kruger's pale face, then swept across the room, full of frozen witnesses. His expression revealed nothing, but 30 years of command had taught him to assess situations rapidly and completely. "Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez," he said, approaching with the kind of respectful formality reserved for serious incidents. "I'm Colonel Harrison, base commander. Are you able to provide a statement at this time, or do you require additional medical attention first?" Elena straightened to her full height despite the throbbing in her skull. "Sir, I'm prepared to provide a complete statement. The assault was unprovoked and occurred when I questioned Staff Sergeant Kruger's equipment inspection procedures. His response was immediate physical violence, followed by verbal statements indicating gender bias and assumptions about my authority based on my civilian attire." Major Reeves stepped forward, her legal training evident in how she began structuring the incident for formal documentation. "Ma'am, we'll need detailed statements from all witnesses, but first I need to advise Staff Sergeant Kruger of his rights under Article 31 of the UCMJ." Kruger's legs finally gave out completely, and he collapsed into the nearest chair. The weight of facing court-martial proceedings under military law had overwhelmed his ability to remain standing. Chaplain O'Brien moved toward him, recognizing the signs of someone whose world had just collapsed entirely. "Son," the chaplain said quietly, "we're going to need legal counsel, and you're going to need spiritual guidance. What happened here today will have consequences that extend far beyond this moment." Colonel Harrison turned his attention to the room full of witnesses, his command voice carrying easily to every corner of the large space. "Everyone present is now part of an official investigation under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You will each provide detailed written statements describing exactly what you observed. No detail is too small, and complete accuracy is mandatory." The witnesses shifted uncomfortably as they realized their casual lunch had become testimony in formal military legal proceedings. Several junior enlisted personnel looked genuinely terrified at the prospect of giving statements that would be reviewed by base command and potentially used in court-martial proceedings. Master Sergeant Blackwood approached Colonel Harrison with additional information that had been developing during the response. "Sir, security cameras captured the entire incident from multiple angles. Base Communications also has recordings of all radio traffic and emergency calls related to the response." Colonel Harrison nodded, his expression grim as he processed the implications. Multiple camera angles and radio recordings meant there would be no ambiguity about what had occurred. The evidence would be comprehensive and undeniable. Major Reeves began reading Kruger his rights, her voice clear and professional despite the unusual circumstances. "Staff Sergeant Kruger, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you in a court-martial proceeding. You have the right to consult with a lawyer and to have a lawyer present during any questioning." As the rights advisement continued, Elena noticed that additional personnel were arriving outside. Through the windows, she could see vehicles with markings indicating Inspector General investigators and Criminal Investigation Command personnel. The incident had triggered responses from multiple levels of military authority. Kitchen Supervisor Holloway remained behind the counter, her civilian status making her an unusual but important witness to military legal proceedings. She had worked on bases long enough to understand that what she had observed would likely result in policy changes and additional training requirements for all base personnel. Captain Torres coordinated with the arriving investigators, her radio crackling with updates about evidence preservation and witness management. The dining facility was being transformed into a formal crime scene, complete with photography teams and evidence collection specialists. Kruger looked up from his chair, his face ashen as the full weight of military justice began settling on his shoulders. "Colonel Harrison, sir, I made a terrible mistake. I didn't know who she was. I thought she was just another civilian contractor trying to interfere with military operations." Colonel Harrison's response was delivered with the kind of cold precision that ended military careers. "Staff Sergeant, your ignorance of Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez's identity does not excuse your decision to physically assault someone who posed no threat to you or your personnel. Your actions violated multiple articles of the UCMJ and demonstrated a fundamental failure of military bearing and professional judgment." The colonel's words echoed across the silent cafeteria like a final verdict. Every witness understood they had observed the moment when one man's poor decision had destroyed his career and potentially impacted hundreds of other military personnel who would now receive additional training on proper conduct and respect for authority regardless of uniform or appearance. Elena remained standing throughout the proceedings, her military bearing evident despite her civilian clothes and medical bandage. The incident had revealed the importance of recognizing authority and maintaining professional standards regardless of circumstances, and the consequences of failure would ripple through the entire installation for years to come. The secure phone in Colonel Harrison's staff vehicle began ringing with the distinctive tone reserved for priority communications from Division Command. Major Reeves paused her rights advisement as the colonel stepped outside to answer what was clearly a call that would determine how far up the chain of command this incident would escalate. Through the cafeteria windows, witnesses could see Colonel Harrison's posture change as he listened to whoever was speaking. His responses were brief and formal, consisting mainly of "yes, sir," and "understood, sir," the kind of language that indicated he was receiving direct orders from significantly higher authority. Elena watched the conversation through the glass, her expression revealing she understood exactly what was happening. The assault on a lieutenant colonel by an enlisted man had triggered automatic notification procedures that reached far beyond base-level command. Someone at division or corps level was now personally involved in determining the response. Captain Torres coordinated with the Criminal Investigation Command agents who had begun setting up their equipment in the corner of the cafeteria. Agent Sarah Chun approached Elena with the kind of respectful formality reserved for senior officers who are also crime victims. "Ma'am, Agent Chun, CID. We need to photograph your injuries before any additional medical treatment. These photos will become part of the official evidence package that will be reviewed at multiple command levels." As Agent Chun began documenting Elena's injuries with professional-grade photography equipment, Kruger watched from his chair with growing horror. Each flash of the camera represented another piece of evidence that would be examined by investigators, prosecutors, and command authorities who would determine his fate under military law. Major Reeves finished the rights advisement and approached Kruger with legal documents that would formalize his status as a subject in the investigation. "Staff Sergeant, you're being placed under investigation for violation of Articles 86, 89, and 128 of the UCMJ. Do you understand the charges being considered against you?" Kruger's voice was barely audible as he responded. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. Article 86 is assault. Article 89 is disrespect to a superior commissioned officer. I don't know what Article 128 covers." "Battery," Major Reeves replied coldly. "The physical contact that caused injury elevates this from simple assault to battery, which carries significantly more severe penalties under military law." The main doors opened again, admitting Lieutenant Colonel David Garrett from the Base Inspector General's office, along with a team of investigators carrying equipment that suggested they were prepared for an extensive investigation. Garrett's presence indicated that this incident would be examined for systemic failures and potential policy violations. Colonel Harrison returned from his phone conversation, his expression even more serious than before. His announcement to the room carried the weight of decisions made at the highest levels of military command. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just spoken with Major General Patricia Walsh at Division Headquarters. This incident has been classified as a Priority 1 investigation due to the assault on a senior officer and the potential implications for base security and personnel conduct standards. The words Priority 1 hit the room like an explosive device. Witnesses who had hoped this might be resolved at base level suddenly realized they were part of an investigation that would be reviewed by general officers and potentially impact military policy at levels far beyond their installation. Agent Shin finished photographing Elena's injuries and began documenting the scene itself, capturing the overturned chair, the blood spots on the concrete floor, and the positions of all witnesses. Every detail would be preserved for review by investigators and legal authorities who would determine both individual accountability and systemic improvements. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett approached Elena with the kind of respectful attention that indicated he understood the broader implications of the incident. Ma'am, the Inspector General's office will be conducting a comprehensive review of base policies regarding personnel conduct, recognition of authority, and prevention of gender-based assumptions in professional interactions. Elena nodded, recognizing that Kruger's assault had revealed vulnerabilities in training and culture that extended far beyond one man's poor judgment. The incident would likely result in base-wide policy changes and additional training requirements for all personnel. Kitchen Supervisor Holloway was approached by a CD agent who needed her statement as a civilian witness to military legal proceedings. Her perspective, as someone outside the military chain of command but familiar with base operations, would provide important context for investigators examining systemic issues. Ma'am, Agent Rodriguez said to Holloway, your observations as a civilian employee are crucial for understanding how this incident appeared to non-military personnel. We need detailed information about what you saw and heard. Kruger remained in his chair, watching the expanding investigation with the expression of someone who had finally grasped that his single moment of violence had triggered consequences that would be studied and analyzed by military authorities at the highest levels. His career was over, but the impact of his actions would continue long after his departure. Corporal Martinez was called forward to provide the first witness statement, his nervous energy evident as he approached the CID agents who would record every detail of what he had observed. The other witnesses watched with growing anxiety, realizing they would each be required to provide formal testimony that would become part of permanent military records. Major Reeves received an urgent message on her secure communication device and immediately approached Colonel Harrison with information that would further escalate the situation. Sir, Division Legal has directed that this case be prepared for general court-martial proceedings. They're also requesting immediate notification to the Pentagon due to the policy implications. The mention of Pentagon notification caused several witnesses to exchange glances of disbelief. What had begun as a cafeteria altercation was now an incident that would be reviewed by the highest levels of military command and potentially influence policy decisions affecting hundreds of thousands of service members. Colonel Harrison addressed the room again, his voice carrying the authority of someone delivering orders from the highest levels of command. This investigation is now under direct supervision of Division Headquarters with Pentagon oversight. All personnel involved will remain available for additional questioning as required. This incident will be thoroughly investigated and prosecuted to the fullest extent of military law. Elena continued to stand despite her injury, her military bearing serving as a stark contrast to Kruger's collapsed posture. The incident had demonstrated the importance of maintaining professional standards and recognizing authority regardless of circumstances, and the military's response would ensure that the lessons learned would be implemented across the entire force structure. The sound of helicopters approaching from the south caused everyone in the cafeteria to look toward the windows with expressions of growing disbelief. The distinctive rotor signature indicated military aircraft, and their arrival meant that command authorities were responding with unprecedented speed and resources to what had been a simple dining facility incident 90 minutes earlier. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett received an encrypted message on his secure tablet and immediately approached Colonel Harrison with information that would transform the investigation yet again. Sir, Major General Walsh is en route by helicopter with a full investigative team from Division Headquarters. Estimated arrival time is 12 minutes. The announcement hit the room like artillery fire. Major generals didn't personally respond to base-level incidents unless those incidents had implications that reached far beyond local command authority. Every witness understood they were now part of something that would be studied at the highest levels of military leadership. Agent Chun finished her crime scene documentation and approached Elena with forms that would initiate the formal victim statement process. Ma'am, we need your detailed account of the incident for the official record. This statement will be reviewed by general officers and used in court-martial proceedings. Elena accepted the paperwork with the kind of calm professionalism that indicated she was familiar with high-level military legal processes. Her responses would be precise and comprehensive, providing investigators with the detailed information needed to understand both the incident itself and its broader implications for military culture and conduct. Kruger watched the preparation for the general's arrival with the expression of someone who had finally grasped that his assault on a lieutenant colonel had triggered a response typically reserved for major security breaches or international incidents. His single moment of violence had escalated far beyond anything he could have imagined possible. Master Sergeant Blackwood coordinated with additional security personnel who were establishing perimeters around the dining facility in preparation for the general's arrival. The cafeteria was being treated as both a crime scene and a secure briefing location for senior command personnel. Captain Torres received updated instructions through her radio and announced them to the assembled witnesses. All personnel will remain in their current positions until individually released by CID agents or division command personnel. This is now classified as a division-level investigation with full command attention. The helicopters could now be seen approaching the base landing zone, their formation indicating a command element that included not just Major General Walsh, but additional senior officers whose presence suggested this incident had triggered policy reviews at multiple levels of military hierarchy. Major Reeves completed her preliminary legal assessment and approached Colonel Harrison with a summary that would be briefed to the incoming general. Sir, the evidence supports charges under multiple articles of the UCMJ. The assault was unprovoked, witnessed by multiple personnel, and captured on security cameras from several angles. Kitchen Supervisor Holloway was interviewed by Agent Rodriguez, her civilian perspective providing crucial context for investigators examining how the incident appeared to non-military observers. Her detailed account would help command authorities understand the full scope of what had occurred and its potential impact on base community relations. Ma'am, Agent Rodriguez said, your observations about the verbal exchanges and physical actions will be essential for understanding the sequence of events. Please describe exactly what you heard and saw from your position behind the serving counter. As Holloway provided her statement, other witnesses began the formal interview process with CID agents who would compile comprehensive reports for review by the incoming general and division legal authorities. Each account would be compared and analyzed to establish a complete picture of the incident. Elena completed her victim statement with the precision of someone who understood that every word would be scrutinized by military legal authorities and senior command personnel. Her account detailed not only the physical assault, but also the verbal statements that had revealed gender bias and assumptions about civilian versus military authority. The sound of vehicles arriving in the parking lot indicated that the general's advance team was establishing security and communication protocols in preparation for Major General Walsh's arrival. The base was being transformed into a secure command center for what was clearly becoming a major military investigation. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett received another secure communication and announced the updated timeline to Colonel Harrison. Sir, Major General Walsh will arrive in 6 minutes. She's bringing the Division Chief of Staff, the Staff Judge Advocate, and a team of investigators who will assume command of this investigation. Kruger's lawyer, Captain Jennifer Liu from Base Legal Services, arrived and immediately began conferring with her client about the charges he was facing. Her expression was grim as she reviewed the evidence that had been compiled against him in less than 2 hours. Staff Sergeant Captain Liu said quietly, "You're facing serious charges that could result in dismissal from service, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and confinement. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the command attention this has received means there will be no consideration of reduced charges." The reality of military justice finally penetrated Kruger's consciousness completely. His assault on Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez had destroyed his career, but more importantly, it had revealed systemic issues that would be addressed through policy changes affecting thousands of military personnel across multiple installations. Agent Chun approached Colonel Harrison with preliminary forensic results that would be included in the briefing from Major General Walsh. "Sir, the photographic evidence clearly documents the injury to Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, and security camera footage confirms the assault occurred exactly as described by witnesses." The approaching helicopter noise grew louder, indicating that the highest-ranking military officer to visit this base in over 2 years was about to arrive to personally oversee an investigation that had escalated far beyond anyone's initial expectations. The incident had demonstrated vulnerabilities in military culture and training that required immediate attention from senior leadership. Captain Torres made a final announcement to the witnesses who remained secured in the dining facility. Major General Walsh will arrive momentarily to assume personal command of this investigation. All personnel will maintain their current positions and be prepared to provide additional statements as required by Division Command. The 37 witnesses sat in absolute silence, understanding that they had observed an incident that would be studied, analyzed, and used to implement policy changes that would affect military personnel for years to come. What had begun as a simple assault had become a case study in the importance of professional conduct, respect for authority, and the consequences of assumptions based on gender and appearance. The helicopters touched down with military precision on the base landing zone, their rotor wash visible through the cafeteria windows as dust and debris swirled across the tarmac. Major General Patricia Walsh emerged from the lead aircraft, followed by a command team that included more stars and eagles than most base personnel had ever seen assembled in one location. Colonel Harrison's radio crackled with direct communication from the general's aide-de-camp. "Sir, Major General Walsh requests immediate briefing on the incident status, evidence compilation, and witness security. She will personally interview Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez and review all documentation before determining final disposition." The weight of having a 2-star general personally involved in what had begun as a cafeteria altercation was not lost on anyone present. Major General Walsh's decision to respond in person indicated that this incident had implications reaching far beyond base boundaries and individual accountability. Agent Chun completed her evidence package compilation and prepared to brief the incoming command team on forensic findings that would support court-martial proceedings. The photographic documentation, witness statements, and security camera footage provided overwhelming evidence of both the assault and the subsequent statements revealing gender bias. Elena remained standing despite her injury, her military bearing evident as she prepared to provide her account directly to Division Command. The incident had revealed systemic issues that would require attention from the highest levels of military leadership, and her testimony would be crucial for implementing necessary changes. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett received secure communications indicating that the investigation scope was expanding beyond the immediate incident. Division headquarters was examining base policies, training programs, and cultural factors that had contributed to an environment where such an assault could occur. "Sir," Garrett informed Colonel Harrison, "Major General Walsh has directed a comprehensive review of all base personnel policies regarding recognition of authority, professional conduct standards, and prevention of gender-based assumptions in military settings." The cafeteria doors opened to admit the general's advanced security team, their presence transforming the dining facility into a secure briefing location suitable for division-level command operations. Every detail was being managed with a precision reserved for major military operations. Kruger watched the preparations with complete understanding that his single act of violence had triggered a response that would affect thousands of military personnel across multiple installations. His assault on Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez had become a catalyst for policy reviews and cultural changes that would be implemented throughout the division. Captain Liu continued conferring with her client about legal options that were rapidly diminishing as evidence mounted and command attention intensified. "Staff Sergeant," she said quietly, "the General's personal involvement means this case will be prosecuted with maximum resources and attention. Plea negotiations may be possible, but dismissal from service is now inevitable." Master Sergeant Blackwood coordinated with division security personnel who were establishing communication protocols and evidence chain of custody procedures that would ensure all documentation met the standards required for general court-martial proceedings under intense command scrutiny. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor indicated that Major General Walsh was making her way to the cafeteria, accompanied by senior staff officers whose presence would formalize the transition from base-level incident to division-level investigation with far-reaching implications. Kitchen Supervisor Holloway completed her detailed statement for CID investigators, her civilian perspective providing important context for understanding how the incident had appeared to non-military observers. Her account would be crucial for policy reviews examining base community relations and professional conduct standards. Agent Rodriguez finished interviewing the first group of military witnesses, their statements providing comprehensive documentation of the assault and subsequent verbal exchanges that had revealed underlying attitudes requiring immediate command attention and corrective action. Major Reeves received updated legal guidance from division headquarters regarding prosecution strategies and evidence presentation requirements for cases involving assault on senior officers. The legal proceedings would be conducted with maximum attention to detail and procedural correctness. Captain Torres maintained coordination with multiple command elements as the investigation expanded to include policy review teams, training assessment specialists, and cultural analysis experts who would examine systemic factors contributing to the incident. The main doors opened with ceremony befitting the arrival of a Major General, and Patricia Walsh entered accompanied by Brigadier General Robert Chun, Division Chief of Staff, and Colonel Sarah Martinez, Division Staff Judge Advocate. Their presence indicated that this investigation would receive the highest level of command attention and resources. Major General Walsh surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 30 years evaluating military situations and their broader implications. Her assessment would determine not only individual accountability, but also policy changes affecting thousands of personnel throughout her division. Colonel Harrison approached the general with the formal respect due her rank and position. "Ma'am, incident briefing prepared. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez sustained head injury requiring medical attention. Staff Sergeant Kruger has been advised of his rights and is represented by counsel. All witnesses secured and providing statements." Major General Walsh's response carried the authority of someone who understood that this incident represented far more than individual misconduct. "Colonel Harrison, this investigation will examine every aspect of base culture, training effectiveness, and leadership accountability that contributed to creating an environment where such an assault could occur." The general's words echoed across the silent cafeteria, making clear that Kruger's assault on Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez had become a catalyst for examining and improving military culture at the highest levels. Every witness understood they were part of an investigation that would influence military policy and training for years to come. Elena prepared to provide her account directly to Division Command, recognizing that her testimony would be crucial for implementing changes that would prevent similar incidents throughout the military. The assault had revealed vulnerabilities that required immediate attention from senior leadership committed to maintaining professional standards and respect for all personnel regardless of gender or appearance. Major General Walsh approached Elena with the kind of respectful attention reserved for senior officers who had become victims of serious military crimes. Her assessment was both personal and professional, recognizing that this incident would require immediate action to address systemic failures that had contributed to the assault. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, the general said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent cafeteria, I want your complete account of this incident, including any statements made by Staff Sergeant Kruger that revealed assumptions about your authority based on your gender or civilian attire. Elena's response was delivered with the precision of someone who understood that her testimony would be used to implement policy changes affecting thousands of military personnel. Ma'am, Staff Sergeant Kruger struck me without warning when I questioned his equipment inspection procedures. His subsequent statements indicated he assumed I was a civilian contractor based on my workout, clothing, and gender. The general's expression hardened as she processed the implications of Elena's account. Brigadier General Chun and Colonel Martinez took detailed notes that would become part of the comprehensive report being prepared for Pentagon review and policy implementation throughout the military. Major General Walsh turned her attention to Kruger, who remained seated under guard while his lawyer provided counsel about the overwhelming evidence mounted against him. Her assessment was delivered with the cold authority of someone who had spent decades maintaining military discipline and professional standards. Staff Sergeant Kruger, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, your assault on Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez represents a fundamental failure of military-bearing, professional judgment, and respect for authority. Your actions have brought disgrace upon your unit, your service, and the United States military. Kruger's response was barely audible, his voice cracking under the weight of facing a two-star general whose presence meant his career was definitively over. Ma'am, I made a terrible mistake. I didn't recognize Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez's authority because she wasn't in uniform. I realize now that my assumptions were completely wrong. The general's reply was delivered with the kind of finality that ended military careers and shaped policy for generations. Staff Sergeant, your ignorance of proper conduct and respect for all personnel regardless of their attire or gender demonstrates failures in training, leadership, and personal character that cannot be excused or minimized. Colonel Martinez approached with legal documentation that would formalize the charges being prepared for general court-martial proceedings. Ma'am, the evidence supports charges under Articles 86, 89, 128, and 134 of the UCMJ. The prosecution will seek maximum penalties, including dismissal and confinement. Agent Chun presented her forensic report to the general, including photographic evidence of Elena's injuries and security camera footage that captured every moment of the assault from multiple angles. The documentation was comprehensive and would leave no doubt about what had occurred. Major General Walsh reviewed the evidence with the thoroughness of someone who understood that this case would be scrutinized by Pentagon officials and used as a foundation for military-wide policy changes. The assault had revealed cultural and training failures that required immediate and comprehensive response. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett briefed the general on the broader investigation that was expanding to examine base policies, training effectiveness, and leadership accountability. Ma'am, we're conducting a comprehensive review of all factors that contributed to creating an environment where such an incident could occur. The general's response indicated that the investigation would extend far beyond individual accountability to address systemic issues affecting military culture throughout her division. This incident will serve as a catalyst for examining and improving our training, policies, and leadership practices at every level. Brigadier General Chun coordinated with Pentagon liaisons who were monitoring the investigation and preparing to implement lessons learned across all military installations. The assault on Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez had become a case study in the importance of maintaining professional standards regardless of circumstances. Kitchen Supervisor Holloway was interviewed directly by Major General Walsh, her civilian perspective providing crucial insight into how the incident had appeared to non-military personnel observing military conduct and professionalism. Ma'am, Holloway said nervously, I've worked on military bases for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what Staff Sergeant Kruger did. The lieutenant colonel was completely professional, and his response was shocking and completely unprovoked. The general's assessment of witness testimony confirmed that the assault had occurred exactly as documented, with overwhelming evidence supporting the most serious charges under military law. The prosecution would proceed with maximum resources and attention to detail. Master Sergeant Blackwood coordinated with division investigators who were expanding their examination to include all personnel who had worked with Kruger, seeking to identify any previous incidents or patterns of behavior that might have predicted such an assault. Captain Torres received instructions from division headquarters regarding the expansion of the investigation to include comprehensive policy reviews and training assessments that would prevent similar incidents throughout the military. Major General Walsh addressed the assembled witnesses, her voice carrying the authority of someone announcing decisions that would affect military policy for years to come. This investigation will result in comprehensive changes to our training programs, policy implementation, and cultural standards throughout the division. The general's announcement made clear that Kruger's assault on Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez had triggered a response that would examine and improve military culture at the highest levels. Every witness understood they had observed an incident that would influence policy and training affecting hundreds of thousands of service members. Elena remained standing throughout the proceedings, her military bearing serving as a stark contrast to Kruger's collapsed posture and providing a powerful example of professional conduct under the most difficult circumstances. The investigation had evolved from a simple assault case into a comprehensive examination of military culture, training effectiveness, and leadership accountability that would result in lasting improvements to professional standards throughout the armed forces. The secure communication equipment that Major General Walsh's team had established in the corner of the cafeteria began receiving priority transmissions from the Pentagon, indicating that this incident had reached the highest levels of military command and was being monitored by officials responsible for military policy across all service branches. Brigadier General Chun approached Major General Walsh with information that would further escalate the significance of the investigation. "Ma'am, the Secretary of the Army's office has requested a preliminary report within 6 hours. This incident is being examined as a potential catalyst for department-wide policy reforms regarding professional conduct and respect for authority." The mention of Secretary of the Army involvement caused every witness in the room to understand that they had observed something that would be studied and analyzed by the highest levels of government officials responsible for military affairs. Kruger's assault had triggered attention from officials who shape policy affecting millions of service members worldwide. Colonel Martinez received updated legal guidance that would determine prosecution strategy for what was now considered a landmark case under military law. "Ma'am, Division Legal recommends proceeding with the most serious charges available. This case will likely be cited in future training and legal proceedings throughout the military." Major General Walsh reviewed additional evidence that had been compiled during the expanding investigation, including Kruger's personnel records, previous performance evaluations, and training history that would be examined for patterns that might have predicted such misconduct. The general's assessment revealed disturbing information about missed opportunities for intervention and corrective action. Staff Sergeant Kruger's records indicate previous counseling sessions for inappropriate comments about female personnel and resistance to authority from officers he deemed unqualified based on gender or appearance. This revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled command personnel and witnesses, making clear that the assault had not been an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of ongoing behavioral problems that had not been adequately addressed by his chain of command. Elena listened to the personnel record review with the understanding that this information would be crucial for implementing systemic changes to prevent similar escalations in the future. The incident had revealed failures in supervision, counseling, and progressive discipline that would need to be addressed throughout the military. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett coordinated with Inspector General investigators who were expanding their examination to include Kruger's entire chain of command, seeking to identify failures in leadership oversight and accountability that had allowed his behavior to escalate to physical violence. Agent Chun presented additional forensic evidence that had been discovered during the comprehensive investigation, including security camera footage from previous incidents involving Kruger that had not been properly documented or addressed by his supervisors. "Ma'am," Chin reported to Major General Walsh, "we've identified at least 3 previous incidents where Staff Sergeant Kruger displayed inappropriate behavior toward female personnel, including verbal disrespect and insubordination. None of these incidents resulted in formal disciplinary action. The pattern of escalating misconduct that had been ignored or inadequately addressed by leadership provided crucial context for understanding how the assault had occurred and what systemic changes would be necessary to prevent similar incidents throughout the military." Captain Liu continued counseling her client about the overwhelming evidence and expanding charges that would be brought against him in court-martial proceedings. "Staff Sergeant," she said quietly, "the pattern of previous misconduct means you're facing the most serious possible consequences under military law." Kitchen Supervisor Holloway was questioned about any previous interactions she had observed between Kruger and other personnel, her civilian perspective providing important insight into behavior patterns that military personnel might have overlooked or failed to report properly. Major General Walsh addressed Colonel Harrison directly about command responsibility and accountability for the failures that had allowed Kruger's behavior to escalate without intervention. "Colonel, this investigation will examine every level of leadership that failed to address the warning signs that preceded this assault." The general's words carried implications that extended far beyond Kruger's individual accountability to include potential disciplinary action against supervisors and commanders who had failed to maintain proper standards and intervene when misconduct was identified. Brigadier General Chun coordinated with Pentagon officials who were developing policy recommendations based on the lessons being learned from this investigation. The assault would become a case study in the importance of early intervention and progressive discipline in maintaining military culture. Master Sergeant Blackwood received instructions to secure additional personnel records and training documentation that would be examined for systemic failures in education, supervision, and accountability that had contributed to creating an environment where such an assault could occur. The investigation had revealed that Kruger's assault on Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez was not an isolated incident, but rather the predictable result of ongoing behavioral problems that had been inadequately addressed by multiple levels of leadership over an extended period. Agent Rodriguez completed interviews with additional witnesses who had observed Kruger's previous inappropriate behavior, but had not reported it through proper channels, revealing failures in reporting procedures and command climate that would require immediate attention. Major General Walsh made the announcement that would determine the scope of consequences extending far beyond individual accountability. This investigation has revealed systemic failures in leadership, training, and culture that will be addressed through comprehensive reforms affecting all levels of command throughout the division. The general's declaration made clear that the assault had exposed vulnerabilities that required immediate and comprehensive response from the highest levels of military leadership committed to maintaining professional standards and respect for all personnel regardless of gender, rank, or appearance. Elena prepared to provide additional testimony about the broader cultural factors that had contributed to the incident, understanding that her insights would be crucial for implementing changes that would prevent similar assaults throughout the military and ensure that all personnel were treated with appropriate respect and professionalism. The arrival of additional helicopters on the landing zone signaled that the investigation had reached levels of command attention that none of the witnesses had ever experienced. Through the cafeteria windows, they could see the distinctive markings of aircraft carrying officials from the Pentagon, indicating that this incident would now be examined by the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. Major General Walsh received a secure communication that would determine the final scope of consequences extending throughout the military hierarchy. The message was brief, but carried implications that would reshape policies affecting hundreds of thousands of service members across all branches of the armed forces. "Ma'am," Brigadier General Chun announced after reviewing the classified transmission, "the Secretary of Defense has personally directed that this incident serve as the foundation for comprehensive reforms to military culture, training programs, and accountability standards throughout all service branches." The mention of Secretary of Defense involvement meant that Kruger's assault on Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez had become a catalyst for policy changes at the highest levels of American military leadership. Every witness understood they had observed an incident that would influence military culture for generations. Elena stood at attention as Major General Walsh approached with information that would reveal the true scope of how this incident would transform military policies and procedures. Lieutenant Colonel, your testimony and the evidence compiled from this investigation will be presented to congressional committees examining military culture and professional conduct standards. The revelation that congressional oversight would be involved demonstrated that the assault had implications extending far beyond military justice to include civilian leadership responsible for overseeing the armed forces. The incident would be studied by elected officials who would demand accountability and systematic improvements. Colonel Martinez coordinated with Pentagon legal specialists who were developing prosecution strategies that would set precedents for future cases involving assault on senior officers and gender-based misconduct. This case will establish new standards for military justice proceedings and command accountability. Agent Chun presented her final forensic report, which documented not only the immediate assault, but also the pattern of escalating misconduct that had been ignored by multiple levels of leadership over an extended period. The evidence package would be used to implement systemic reforms preventing similar failures. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett received instructions from the Inspector General's office at the Pentagon to expand the investigation to include comprehensive reviews of leadership accountability, training effectiveness, and cultural factors at installations throughout the military that might harbor similar problems. Kruger watched the expanding investigation with complete understanding that his assault had triggered consequences reaching to the highest levels of American government and military leadership. His single act of violence had become a catalyst for examining and reforming military culture throughout the entire defense establishment. Captain Liu completed her assessment of the overwhelming evidence and expanding charges that would be brought against her client in proceedings that would be monitored by officials throughout the military justice system. Staff Sergeant, she said with finality, you're facing the maximum possible penalties under military law with no possibility of reduced charges. Kitchen Supervisor Holloway was interviewed by Pentagon investigators seeking civilian perspectives on military conduct and professionalism that would inform policy recommendations for improving relations between military personnel and civilian employees throughout the defense establishment. Master Sergeant Blackwood coordinated with investigative teams that were expanding their examination to include similar incidents at installations throughout the military, seeking to identify patterns of misconduct and leadership failures that had not been properly addressed by existing policies and procedures. Major General Walsh addressed the assembled personnel with announcements that would determine the lasting impact of this investigation on military culture and accountability standards. This incident has revealed systemic failures that will be addressed through immediate and comprehensive reforms affecting every level of military leadership and training. The General's declaration carried the authority of someone announcing decisions that had been made by the highest levels of military and civilian leadership responsible for maintaining the professional standards and ethical conduct of the armed forces. Brigadier General Chun received additional instructions from Pentagon officials who were coordinating with congressional committees preparing to examine military culture and the effectiveness of existing policies for preventing gender-based misconduct and ensuring respect for all personnel regardless of rank or appearance. The investigation had evolved from examining individual accountability to addressing fundamental questions about military culture, leadership effectiveness, and the institutional commitment to maintaining professional standards that reflected the values of American society and democratic governance. Agent Rodriguez completed documentation of witness statements that would be used not only for court-martial proceedings, but also for training programs and policy development initiatives that would be implemented throughout the military to prevent similar incidents and ensure appropriate conduct. Elena prepared to provide testimony that would be used by Pentagon officials and congressional committees examining how military culture could be improved to ensure that all personnel were treated with appropriate respect and professionalism regardless of gender, rank, or civilian attire. The assault that had begun as a simple cafeteria altercation had become a defining moment for military culture and accountability, triggering reforms that would be implemented throughout the defense establishment and monitored by the highest levels of American government and military leadership. Major General Walsh made the final announcement that would determine how this incident would be remembered and used to improve military culture for future generations. Staff Sergeant Kruger's assault on Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez will serve as a catalyst for the most comprehensive examination and reform of military conduct standards in over 2 decades. The general's words echoed across the silent cafeteria, making clear that every witness had observed an incident that would be studied, analyzed, and used to implement lasting improvements to military culture, training, and accountability throughout the American Armed Forces. The final phase of the investigation began as Pentagon officials arrived to witness the formal charges being read against Staff Sergeant Kruger, their presence indicating that this court-martial would serve as a landmark case for military justice proceedings throughout all branches of the armed forces. Lieutenant General Rebecca Morrison stepped through the cafeteria doors accompanied by a team of senior legal officers whose presence meant that the highest levels of military command would personally oversee the prosecution of this case and implementation of resulting policy changes. Major General Walsh approached the 3-star general with a complete briefing package that documented not only the immediate assault, but also the systemic failures that had allowed Kruger's behavior to escalate without proper intervention from his chain of command. "Ma'am," Major General Walsh reported, "Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez sustained significant injury from an unprovoked assault by Staff Sergeant Kruger, who demonstrated clear gender bias and failure to recognize legitimate authority. The incident has revealed widespread failures in training, supervision, and accountability that require immediate reform." Lieutenant General Morrison reviewed the evidence with the thoroughness of someone who understood that this case would establish precedents for military justice and command accountability that would be studied and implemented throughout the defense establishment for decades to come. The 3-star general's assessment was delivered with the authority of someone announcing decisions that had been coordinated with the highest levels of Pentagon leadership and congressional oversight committees responsible for military affairs and professional conduct standards. This investigation will result in the most comprehensive reforms to military culture, training programs, and accountability standards implemented since the establishment of the all-volunteer force, Lieutenant General Morrison announced to the assembled personnel and witnesses. Kruger's formal court-martial charges were read by Colonel Martinez in the presence of Pentagon officials who would ensure that the prosecution proceeded with maximum attention to legal precedent and policy implications affecting hundreds of thousands of service members. Staff Sergeant Dalton Michael Kruger, Colonel Martinez announced with ceremonial formality, "You are hereby charged with assault and battery upon a superior commissioned officer, disrespect to a superior commissioned officer, conduct unbecoming a non-commissioned officer, and violation of equal opportunity policies under the Uniform Code of Military Justice." The formal reading of charges in the presence of 3-star command authority demonstrated that Kruger's assault had triggered the most serious possible response under military law, with prosecution resources and command attention typically reserved for cases involving national security or major policy violations. Elena provided her final testimony to Pentagon officials who would use her account to develop training programs and policy initiatives that would be implemented throughout the military to ensure that all personnel understood proper conduct and respect for authority regardless of circumstances. Lieutenant General Morrison said with the respect due a senior officer who had become the catalyst for historic military reforms, "Your professionalism throughout this incident will serve as an example for training programs that will reach every member of the armed forces." Agent Chun presented the complete forensic package to Pentagon investigators, including security camera footage, photographic evidence, and witness statements that provided overwhelming documentation of both the assault and the cultural failures that had contributed to creating an environment where such misconduct could occur. The evidence will be used not only for court-martial proceedings, but also for congressional testimony and policy development initiatives that will transform how the military addresses professional conduct, gender equality, and respect for all personnel, Agent Chen reported to the assembled command personnel. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett briefed Pentagon officials on the comprehensive review of base policies and procedures that had revealed systemic weaknesses in training, supervision, and accountability that would be addressed through military-wide reforms affecting every installation and unit. Kitchen Supervisor Holloway was personally thanked by Lieutenant General Morrison for her courage in reporting the incident and providing testimony that would help improve relations between military personnel and civilian employees throughout the defense establishment. "Ma'am," the general said to Holloway, "your actions in calling for help and providing detailed testimony demonstrate the importance of civilian employees in maintaining professional standards and ensuring accountability for military conduct." Master Sergeant Blackwood received commendation from Pentagon officials for his professional response to the incident and coordination of the investigation that had revealed important information about systemic failures requiring immediate attention from the highest levels of command. The 37 witnesses who had observed the assault were individually recognized by Lieutenant General Morrison for their cooperation in providing testimony that would be used to implement training programs and policy changes affecting military culture throughout all branches of the armed forces. Captain Torres was promoted to Major Effective immediately in recognition of her professional handling of the incident and coordination of the multi-level investigation that had provided crucial information for policy development and implementation. Kruger sat in restraints as Pentagon officials documented his case for use in training programs that would teach future generations of military personnel about the consequences of assault, gender bias, and failure to maintain professional standards regardless of circumstances. The investigation concluded with Lieutenant General Morrison's announcement that would determine how this incident would transform military culture for generations. Staff Sergeant Kruger's assault on Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez will serve as the foundation for comprehensive reforms, ensuring that such failures of leadership, training, and professional conduct never occur again in the United States military. Elena remained at attention as the highest-ranking officers present rendered formal salutes, recognizing her professionalism throughout the incident and acknowledging that her experience would serve as a catalyst for improving military culture and ensuring respect for all personnel regardless of gender, rank, or appearance. The assault that had begun with a single moment of violence had become a defining incident for military justice, accountability, and cultural reform that would influence policies and training affecting millions of service members for decades to come. 6 months after the incident that had transformed military culture throughout the armed forces, the cafeteria where Staff Sergeant Kruger had assaulted Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez had been renamed the Professional Standards Dining Facility, serving as a permanent reminder of the importance of respect, accountability, and proper conduct for all military personnel. The court-martial proceedings had concluded with Kruger receiving the maximum sentence under military law: dismissal from service, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and 18 months confinement. His case had become the foundation for training programs implemented throughout every branch of the military, teaching hundreds of thousands of service members about the consequences of assault and gender bias. Elena stood before a congressional committee in the Hart Senate Office Building, providing testimony that would shape military policy for decades to come. Her professional response to the assault and subsequent investigation had made her a symbol of military professionalism and the importance of maintaining standards regardless of circumstances. Senator Patricia Williams, chair of the Armed Services Committee, addressed Elena with the respect due someone whose experience had catalyzed historic reforms throughout the defense establishment. "Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, your testimony and the investigation that followed have resulted in the most comprehensive military culture reforms implemented in over 20 years. The Vasquez standards, as they had become known throughout the military, included mandatory training on recognizing authority regardless of uniform or appearance, zero-tolerance policies for gender-based misconduct, and enhanced accountability measures for leaders who failed to address inappropriate behavior by their subordinates." Major General Walsh, now promoted to Lieutenant General, had implemented the reforms throughout her expanded command, which included oversight of professional conduct training at installations across 3 states. The investigation had launched her career to new heights while establishing her as a leader committed to maintaining the highest standards of military culture. Every military installation now displayed the professional conduct pledge that had been developed based on Elena's experience. We recognize that respect for all personnel regardless of gender, rank, or appearance is fundamental to military effectiveness and reflects the values of American society that we have sworn to defend. The 37 witnesses who had observed the assault had each received formal recognition for their cooperation in an investigation that had transformed military culture. Their testimony had provided crucial evidence for implementing training programs that would prevent similar incidents throughout the armed forces for generations. Kitchen Supervisor Holloway had been promoted to Base Community Relations Director, her civilian perspective having proven invaluable for improving relations between military personnel and civilian employees throughout the defense establishment. Her courage in reporting the incident had made her a symbol of the importance of civilian oversight in maintaining military standards. Master Sergeant Blackwood had been selected for promotion to Sergeant Major in assignment as the senior enlisted advisor for professional conduct training at the Pentagon. His professional response to the incident having demonstrated the leadership qualities needed to implement cultural reforms throughout the military. Captain Torres, now Major Torres, commanded the Military Professional Standards Training Center that had been established to implement the Vasquez standards throughout all branches of the armed forces. Her coordination during the investigation had proven her ability to manage complex, high-stakes operations with precision and professionalism. The base where the incident had occurred had become a model installation for professional conduct and gender equality, receiving delegations from allied militaries seeking to implement similar reforms in their own armed forces. The assault had become a catalyst for improving military culture throughout the international defense community. Elena's medical treatment had been completed within weeks of the incident, but the policy changes resulting from her experience would continue protecting military personnel for decades. The assault had revealed vulnerabilities that had been addressed through comprehensive reforms affecting every aspect of military training and culture. If this story of courage, professionalism, and transformation moved you, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment or character, or share if you've witnessed similar situations where standing up for what's right led to positive change in your community. The Professional Standards Memorial Garden had been established adjacent to the renamed dining facility, featuring a bronze plaque that commemorated Elena's professionalism and the importance of maintaining respect for all personnel. The garden served as a place for reflection on the values that defined military service in American society. Congressional oversight of military culture had been permanently enhanced, with quarterly reports required on the implementation of professional conduct standards and accountability measures. Elena's testimony had convinced lawmakers that civilian oversight was essential for maintaining public trust in military institutions. The Kruger case had become required study material in military leadership courses throughout all service academies and officer training programs, teaching future military leaders about the importance of early intervention and the consequences of allowing inappropriate behavior to escalate without proper correction. Lieutenant General Morrison had been selected as the first director of military cultural standards, a new Pentagon position created to oversee implementation of reforms throughout the defense establishment. Her leadership during the investigation had demonstrated the commitment to excellence that would be required to maintain lasting change. Elena continued her military career with the knowledge that her professional response to an unprovoked assault had transformed military culture for millions of service members. Her experience had proven that maintaining standards and demanding accountability could create lasting positive change throughout even the largest institutions. The investigation had concluded with the understanding that military effectiveness depended not only on technical competence and physical courage, but also on the professional conduct and mutual respect that reflected the democratic values of American society and ensured that all personnel could serve with dignity regardless of gender, background, or appearance. The assault that had lasted only seconds had created reforms that would protect military personnel for generations, demonstrating that individual acts of courage and professionalism could serve as catalysts for institutional transformation and cultural improvement throughout organizations committed to serving something greater than themselves.